Hello, welcome. This is the Freedom Research Podcast, and my name is Hannes Sarv. My guest today comes from the United States, Tom Nelson, and Tom has been active in climate debate for a long time. He has a master's degree in electrical and electronics engineering, and actually he's also a podcaster, and he has interviewed many scientists who do not agree with the proclaimed climate crisis narrative and offer other explanations for climate change. And of course, Tom is the producer of the new climate documentary by Martin Durkin, Climate the Movie. So welcome, Tom, and thank you for taking the time and giving this interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I want to start by asking you about something I saw on your Substack, on a blog about section. You linked to the Smog blog or page there. You have a profile there, and well, I guess I must ask, it really must be an honor that they have noticed you, or why do you link your profile there?
Yeah, not so much an honor, but they list all sorts of my quotes, and they link to many of my podcasts, and they've gone through my Twitter feed, and it's stuff that I want people to know about me. They think that somehow this is maybe a smear job on me, but anyway, it's great stuff. It's quoting what I actually did say, and it's somebody spent a lot of time on it, and I wouldn't have spent that much time myself to write up this About Me page. So it's a pretty good About Me page, and if people want to take a look at it, they can see they can get a reference to my work over the last few years.
But it is in a database that they call Climate Disinformation Database. So you should be somehow, bothered, are you not?
I'm not, because just that's the standard thing that whenever somebody in the climate cult talks about disinformation or misinformation, I replace that with information, and that's what it is. It's information. I'm way over the any sort of anger about this disinformation thing.
Okay. Well, maybe we should actually talk a bit about the Smog's background. I don't know if you want to, share your knowledge. I understand this actually is a PR site which is actually started by a PR professional, James Hogan, and the sole purpose of this site is to actually make PR for, you call it a climate cult, yes. So basically, we can say this is a PR page for, I don't know, climate alarmists or something like that. Would you agree, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, you know more about the actual the people behind it than I do. I just know that, like, Joe Bastardi was saying that he really wanted to be on there. Roger Tallbloke was someone else who was on my podcast, Roger Tattersall, and he was saying that, he enjoyed his profile page there too, because again, it's a great write-up of stuff he actually said and work he's actually done. So it's kind of counterintuitive that it's a good reference for climate skeptics to go ahead and look on that page and find out a lot about other climate realists.
So, but on the other hand, these kinds of blogs, there are a lot of others, of course. They are used by the mainstream media to well, like you said, smear people or tell people that these people are somehow bad people because they spread misinformation about climate and climate change. So that doesn't bother you at all?
Not a single bit. It does not bother me at all. I really dispute what is the mainstream media anymore.
Yeah.
We were talking about CNN and New York Times and Washington Post, and as you look at the people's trust in those type of places, it's plummeting, rightfully, because we've gotten so much disinformation from them. And then if you look at the audiences for like a Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson, their audiences are just dwarfing CNN's audiences, and those guys are just scoffing at the climate scam. There was a time just a few years ago when Joe Rogan was in on this thing, and when Candace Owens mentioned it to him, he was like, he couldn't believe that she didn't believe in the climate scam. But now it comes up. I listen to his podcast quite a bit, and when the climate change thing comes up, he's scoffing at it. His guests are scoffing at it, and that's way more, to me, more of a mainstream media because the audience is way bigger than CNN's audience. So I think we're doing great.
So you think that people are really starting to see through this mist or fog, or that they are, propagating on us, even with the climate change, but other topics as well. So people do not trust those big publications.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak completely freely about COVID here, but I'll just say about so many people in the last few months have told me that they were woken up by COVID, that they found out that we were not being told the truth by COVID, and that the government and the press was lying to us. And then they started asking themselves, what else are they lying to us about? And they started looking at climate, and they found out right away, yep, they're lying big time. They're lying to us every day, big time on climate. And I think that's a huge factor here in that there's an awakening going on here. The elites tried for the Great Reset, and they got a great awakening. I'm seeing, of course, not everybody has figured it out yet, but people are waking up that they need to check stuff for themselves, because over and over they are lying to us.
Yeah, well, just a remark, of course, you can speak about COVID freely, because this is another, topic of interest to us as well. And the same reason, because we got lied, so much lies, and I might say that somewhat I woke up as well. But again, let's talk about your own background a bit. Like I mentioned, you have the master's degree in electrical and electronics engineering, but you weren't always in this climate debate. So what got you interested in that? You mentioned in your Substack that it has something to do with ivory-billed woodpecker. I'd love to hear that story. It seems interesting.
Yeah, so I would say myself, as of about 2005, I would describe myself as a normie. I had heard about this climate change thing. I saw the graph where the temperatures were going up, and I'm sorry to say I kind of believed it. That experts must have, scientists said this is true, it must be true. So I wasn't climate marching or anything, but I was believing that the Earth's temperature had spiked and humans had caused it, I hate to say. But in 2005, I am a bird watcher. In 2005, in April, there was an announcement that this ivory-billed woodpecker had been rediscovered in the U.S. It was a huge deal. It was announced on public radio, and people, when they heard this extinct woodpecker had been rediscovered, they drove off the road and sobbed. A lot of people said they were sobbing with tears that this great thing had happened. And there was a scientific paper that went with it with 17 authors. It was in Science magazine, and it was a done deal. But then I started looking into it for myself, and I was shocked to find out that the evidence behind this woodpecker rediscovery was just flimsy as you could, incredibly flimsy. They had a blurry video, and they had a 6-pixel photo that just had 2 blacks, 2 whites, and 2 blacks, a total of 6 pixels. And that was supposed to be evidence that they had rediscovered this woodpecker. Completely crazy. It was just groupthink. They didn't see it. And, they never did get a picture of it. It was all a complete crock. Then somebody emailed me, and he said, as you look into this woodpecker controversy and find out the evidence is so flimsy, you should look at the climate change or the global warming controversy. It's the same deal. So that one email got me to take a look at the climate change controversy. And again, when I looked at the evidence for myself, I was surprised to find that there was nothing. The evidence that there's a climate crisis or that the weather is getting worse, the earth is too hot, there's no evidence for any of that stuff. It's a complete crock, all of it. Every single bit of anything alarming you've heard about the climate and CO2 causing bad weather, it's all complete baloney, not true. No evidence supports it.
So, Tom, let me ask you this. Do you remember what exactly did you look at, or what was the information? What bit of information really revealed you the fact that okay, no, I don't believe it.
I'll have to look. It might have been polar bears, possibly. That was really heavily stressed in 2005 or 6 that the polar bears were going extinct. That may have been the first thing. It may have been also crop yields. What I like about this whole climate debate is that an ordinary person, you can go in yourself. You don't have to be a climatologist. You don't have to have a degree. Just an ordinary person who can read data and use Google and look at graphs. You can sanity check all these all these alarming things yourself. You can find out our storms really getting worse. Our drought's worse in California now than they were 200 years ago. You can look up all this stuff, and you can find out that, again, none of this stuff is supported by reality. The heat waves in the 30s in the U.S. were just way worse than any heat waves we've seen since. So I've really enjoyed going down all these rabbit holes. I've been doing this since 2006. Several hours each day on average, I've been looking at this stuff, arguing online, and I still enjoy doing this every day.
Okay. And, well, if someone says to you now that, like it's, always said, or last year, for example, someone says to you that, can't you see how many wildfires there are in the world? Well, it must be a fact that our weather is getting worse, or we are somehow causing it with burning fossil fuels or whatever. So what do you say to them? Because it's actually not a rational argument by them, but still, how do you answer to these kinds of things?
Yeah, I say let's look at the real data. And I've looked at the wildfire data, and the wildfires in the past were way worse than the wildfires recently. There's no evidence that additional CO2 causes more wildfires. If you look at a graph just in the U.S. of acres burned in the U.S. in the first half of the 20th century, there was so many. There were tens of millions of acres that were burning, way more back then than there have been recently. And of course, there's a lot of factors. But the whole idea that CO2 causes wildfires to be worse is just not true. There's nothing in the data. We should be able to see it in the data, and we don't. And that's in the U.S. And if you look at global wildfire area burned, again, in decades way in the past, globally, a lot more acres burned than recently. So, it's not backed up at all. There's no evidence, and you can go down any rabbit hole, cyclones, polar bears, whatever, and there's no data anywhere.
Arctic ice data right now, I understand that Arctic ice is not decreasing right now. Because
it hasn't been. I mean, it fluctuates, and I think there's less now than during the global cooling scare in the 70s. If you pick a peak year as your starting point, then you can say, hey, there's less ice now than there was during the peak of Arctic ice. But yeah, since 2007 or so, the Arctic ice has been fluctuating around, and CO2 has not been able to cause it to decrease. There's all sorts of evidence that Arctic conditions fluctuate a lot on decadal scales, and it was really warm in the Arctic in maybe the 1920s, and then it got cooler in the 70s. It got warmer after that, and those fluctuations, there's no reason to believe they're going to stop. That they're going to continue, as far as I know, because there's way more natural variability than you're being told. That's a key point.
Yeah. Well, and of course, other things like Great Barrier Reef. I did an interview with Jennifer Marahasi, a biologist from Australia. She has been working with the reef and documenting it for quite a while, and she was diving there as a child already. So it was decades back, and she says that when cyclones hit reefs and it starts, destroying it, and there's a bleaching and so on, then nobody wants to hear that it's bad. The situation is bad. But when there is some sort of talk that it's global warming doing it, then media worldwide will cover it. And she had particular examples of that. She wanted to draw attention that look at what cyclones do to the reefs. But okay, it's just another thing, and there are a lot more such examples, of course. But let me ask you, why do you think we're being told all of that? Why are we being told that we are, CO2 is boiling the oceans, like Al Gore says, or we're living in a global boiling era, like Mr. Guterres from the UN says, and so on? Why are we being told that?
Yeah, I think, I'm not a fan of the late Charlie Munger, but he talked about a Lollapalooza effect. When there's so many different incentives going in the same direction, you can get a really crazy human irrationality when so many incentives are going in the same direction. So this whole climate scam is a great way to try to control us and get money and power. That's a huge part of it, that there's so much money and power at stake, and we can be scammed out of money and power if people believe that there's a climate crisis. We got to give up our freedom, and we have to buy electric cars and carbon credits and all this stuff. We have to eat the bugs. There's that part of it. And then a huge other part of this is just plain groupthink. I think a lot of people that are selling this to us every day right now, they actually believe that CO2 is causing bad weather and that they're getting up every morning thinking, I'm saving human civilization. So people actually believe this stuff. And they just haven't checked their assumptions. They think that experts have proven this. I don't need to waste my time proving this. I just need to go out and save the world. So a lot of celebrities are pushing this. I think a lot of climate scientists that I deal with on Twitter, they have never looked into natural variability, and they actually think the weather's getting worse, even though they haven't checked it out for themselves. It's pretty amazing. So in the movie, we talk about scientists don't feel free right now to speak out. If you're 40 years old and you have a mortgage and you want to, this thing is a total crock, you don't dare speak out because you're not going to get published. You might lose your job. Your family might get some blowback. And it's so much easier just to sit back and pretend it's true. I think enormous amounts of people are pretending this is true and not speaking out because there's so many disincentives to speak out. But the wall is crumbling, and more people right now, a little more at a time, they're starting to speak out. And I think this thing might crumble much faster than you might think.
Yeah. I actually hope so. Because in our country, in Estonia, we're just, we have a climate ministry. In Estonia. Estonia is a tiny country. I don't know how much you know about Estonia. It's 1.3 million people and 45,000 square kilometers. A really tiny country. And we have a Minister of Climate, So it kind of sounds absurd already. And they're now making the law, which they call the climate law. So we're going to make a law for the climate. So the climate would stop changing. So if I talk about it like this, it kind of sounds absurd, but this is what they are doing.
It is.
That's what
it's completely absurd. Yeah, I mean, there's just the climate councils, too. There's cities that have they have a climate officer in local city councils. And that person's idea, they're going to prevent bad weather in 2075 by whatever they're doing in some little town, some little backwater town. It's completely crazy. I think when people look back at this in the future, they're just going to just scoff at it. But mostly, I think people are just going to stop talking about it. I think that's how this is going to end, that suddenly we're going to find out that we're going to look around and, hey, they're not talking about climate change anymore. There's not going to be a big revelation where people say, hey, we were wrong completely. Sorry about that. They're just going to stop talking about it. That's my prediction.
Yeah, and another thing, maybe you could also add something to this thought. It takes a lot of money to actually build all those, climate change stopping renewable things and stuffs and whatever. And we are running out of money in the West because we are, have been printing ourselves out of this mess for a long time because we have had this system. But right now in the world is changing, and other countries, they do not like anymore that we can print ourselves out of this. And if we run out of money and the means to do all kinds of, put up those windmills and solar panels and et cetera, and bankrupt ourselves, then it naturally dies down. Or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I 100% agree with that. It's kind of a luxury. If you don't have real problems, then you can think about spending money on this completely fake problem. One guy who's my friend now, who I've not met in person, is Jasper Machogu. He's in the movie. He's from Kenya. We sent a team there and interviewed him and some people in his village. And he's saying that people in Kenya, we're supposed to think that they're such a hardship, that CO2 is causing bad weather. He says people aren't thinking about climate change. They're thinking about getting their next meal and working on their crops. and they'd like to reduce the hard manual labor they're doing because they don't have fossil energy so they can have tractors that doing their tilling and all that type of stuff. They don't care about this whole climate scam. It's just people who are worried about their next meal. They don't care at all about this whole CO2 thing. So the whole idea that we're doing Africans a favor by preventing them from getting diesel fuel, for example, is just completely crazy, as is the whole thing is crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So now you have mentioned a time or two this movie as well, Climate the movie. So let's talk about this as well, because it's a really nice film you did. So how did you, or because Martin Durkin made the film back in 2007 as well, so some time has passed, and now you decided to revisit the topic. So what's the story behind that? Why did you decide to make it?
Yeah, so I started a podcast in 2022, and one of my initial guests was Martin Durkin. I invited him to be my guest because I was a big fan of The Great Global Warming Swindle. I think that movie does still stand up even today, and people are referencing it on X even right now. So we were just talking about The Great Global Warming Swindle, and just out of the blue, Martin said, knowing what I know now, if I had a little more time to work on it, I think I could produce a better movie or do a better movie. So that kind of kicked off the whole thing. And Martin and I started working together on that. And he did all the interviews. He wrote the script. He did the narration. And I give him 100% of the credit, him and his team, for producing such a great movie. But I'm very happy with the success of the movie. It's been rolled out online. I think there's over 100 copies of the movie right now that are out there. People have downloaded full copies and put it up on X and Rumble and BitChute, etc. Lots of clips are up everywhere, and it's going to be very hard for anyone to take it down just because it's up everywhere now.
Yeah. So what's did you have any, well, obviously you didn't have any business model behind it. I mean, what kind of model were you aiming at? Because you are sharing it around, you want people just to know, I understand.
Yeah. There's no business model. That we're not trying to make any money. We're not charging for it. We just want a lot of people to see it. Martin is very good at spending small amounts of money well, and it did not cost that much to make this movie. Just some travel and a lot of people volunteered their time. So that's the thing that you can go to my Substack, Tom Nelson Substack, and you can find copies of the full movie and the clips, and you can put them up yourself anywhere you want. We just want a lot of people to see it, because it's just so important to fight back against this scam. It is kind of the fight of our lifetimes, because if we let the bad guys win, they're going to reduce our freedom, and it's going to be a much worse world if we let them impose all this crazy stuff on us to try to prevent bad weather. And as I keep saying, we could spend $50 trillion. We could never have an internal combustion car again, never eat any meat, and go live in caves, and still there would be no measurable weather or climate benefit ever. It's all pain and it's no gain.
Yeah. But what about the reception of the film? I mean, not by the audience at large, but I understand that there has been some efforts of censorship. So can you share your thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's been some efforts at censorship of Facebook. Just in recent weeks has been putting up warnings and kind of suggesting that you might get banned or something if you put up a link to this movie because it's misinformation or disinformation. And then they link to this science feedback thing. Yeah. It's kind of odd. The science feedback thing, there's only one listed author there. I think he's some sort of a designer or something. And it's kind of a ghost-written thing. It's very odd. And there's been a little pushback like that, but there's been nothing that I've seen about it from the Washington Post or New York Times. I think those type of folks are hoping that if they ignore it, it'll go away. But I'm very pleased that it's getting so many views. The Wide Awake Media guy put up a full copy on X, and that tweet has 1.3 million views. And there's lots of places where there's millions of views. If you look around on YouTube, etc. We're not banned from YouTube. I'm kind of surprised the movie is still up on YouTube. I kind of thought they would take it down.
Okay. But I understand there has been efforts of shadow banning, so they're limiting how much it can the potential of how much it can spread.
Yeah, it's hard to prove that. I think it looks like they're trying to make it hard to find on YouTube. If you search for it, a lot of people have complained that they've searched on YouTube or searched on Google and had a hard time finding it. But right now, if I do that, it does come up first on both YouTube and Google right now today, I believe, if I search for it. So I'm not too worried about that. I think the word of mouth is so good here that so many people are saying, you know, I'm sharing this link with everybody that I know, that I think this movie is going to be like the Great Global Warming Swindle, and that people will still be watching it a long time from now because Martin Durkin's work is very, very good here.
Yes, I totally agree, having watched it myself as well. For you, what would you bring out from the movie? What is the part that we should definitely pay, well, we should pay attention to everything there, of course, but pay especially attention. What would you say?
That's a great question, because I hate to pick out my favorite minutes out of the 80 minutes, but there's a lot of data there. The first maybe 2/3 of the movie just mostly goes through the science, and we have a lot of decorated scientists that have been around a long time that know what they're talking about. And they're using strong language to say that this thing, Richard Lindzen calls it a cult, I believe. Yeah. Yep. And Will Happer calls it both a scam and a hoax, I believe. Hoax. And John Clauser, the 2022 Nobel Prize winner, co-winner in physics, what did he call it? He called it a crock. So there's some strong language here, which is great because it is all of those things. It is a hoax and a scam and a cult and a crock. I'm loving that. A lot of people like the section that is filmed in Africa, because that's just an example of real people, again, that I mentioned, with real working on their farms, et cetera. And what they need hydrocarbon fuel because there's so many advantages. We're saying nobody should use it because of the alleged bad weather it causes, but the advantages are huge. Of course, no form of energy is perfect, but the advantages of the energy density and the ability to do work with diesel fuel, for example, is absolutely huge. The whole idea that we should give that up because of this crazy thing that's not backed by science is totally a non-starter. And I do like the closing of the movie too, where Martin is talking about how this is an attack on our freedom. I do think this whole thing is an attack on real people with real jobs, on working people. And there's a lot of people who don't have real jobs, and they're more like bureaucrats, and they love the idea of controlling us, and they don't really care about the people who have to make things work in real life. People farming, and they have to dig in the ground. They have to move large things around to support our lifestyles. So we can't just like ban farming or get rid of farmers because we don't like the fact that they have to plow. We just need a reality check. Humans are not evil, and human activity is not evil, and we have to be able to affect the earth in order to live on the earth.
Yeah. Well, I would say actually is that when you think about talking about the film, when you and in general about people who you have interviewed, and I have interviewed scientists who, well, like I said, who do not buy into this proclaimed climate crisis thing, and say that the evidence shows something different. They are not actually talking about like. A lot of people who are not investigating it themselves think that they are saying that the climate doesn't change at all or something like that. Of course, they're not saying that. That this is one of the things that this film also shows that all these great scientists tell us that, of course, the climate changes. But the thing is that you cannot tie it to one molecule, one carbon dioxide, CO2. So this is one of the things that people who do not know these matters, if they watch it, they might be surprised by that these are not how they call themselves climate deniers. No, they are actually saying that climate changes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, their knowledge of the climate debate is just tiny. It's just so thin that they think that, people who don't believe in the scam, they don't think that the climate is changing. So if a glacier changes its length, then they think, okay, that's my proof. The climate is changing. I know more than all these people that are on the other side. Of course, that's not the way at all. I don't know any climate skeptic who says that the climate isn't changing. Every single climate skeptic that I know thinks that the Earth is warmer now than it was in 1850, and it's warmer now than it was in 1975. That's not what the debate is about. We can all agree on that, but the whole idea that the weather is getting worse, or that there's currently a climate crisis, or that we want the Earth to be colder, that it would be good for us if we went back to little ice age temperatures. It's completely crazy. None of that stuff makes any sense. The whole idea that there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, that makes no sense. You see a number of people that get interviewed, maybe even in front of Congress, and they ask them, well, how much CO2 do you think is in the atmosphere? People don't know that it's 0.04% about. They're guessing numbers like 5% or more. People are worried that the atmosphere is going to fill with CO2. And they think CO2 is maybe looks like black soot or something. The lack of knowledge of what's going on here is kind of astounding.
Yeah, and then if we don't know certain things, if we haven't bothered to look, because this information is freely available, then we can be told basically anything. So this is one of the problems, and this discussion or debate is actually so much, well, at least in the mainstream media, well, okay, what is the mainstream media? But let's legacy media. It's not discussed, debated there. It's given that we have an anthropogenic global warming / climate change, and I think you have also interviewed a lot of scientists in your podcast, and one of the things, well, I have a feeling that this is what they are mainly. Well, if there is frustration, this is what they are mainly frustrated about, is that they cannot have a scientific debate about the matter. Because this side and the other side, or how do you see it?
Yeah, I agree with that the science is supposed to be settled. It's so simple that even a child can understand it. It's basic physics, which is kind of weird that they say it's basic physics, and then we have a Nobel Prize winner in physics saying it's a crock. Then they say, oh, he's not a climatologist. We can't listen to him.
Absolutely.
So, again, yeah, none of that makes any sense at all. So, yeah, I think we should have the debates, and I think people will still be debating what actually is causing the climate to change. It's so incredibly complicated that I think 50 years from now, we're still not going to be able to understand it enough so we can predict what's going to happen next with certainty, because it's just incredibly complicated. People talk about a roulette wheel at Las Vegas. You're trying to figure out where that ball is going to land. That's a simple modeling problem. And then trying to model what's going to happen with Earth's climate is just many orders of magnitude harder than that. There's so many interactions, so many factors. We don't know the starting state of any of these, or many of the variables. We don't know the starting state even. So the whole idea that we can model climate with Fortran and figure out what's going to happen next, no way. It's we can try, but we can't succeed.
Yeah. But what do you think? How much is there censorship on the issue of climate change? Do you feel it?
Well, yeah, I think a big factor on X has been that we can talk freely about climate change. I think that's a huge deal. But yeah, there's censorship. BBC doesn't want to put anybody up there that doesn't believe in the scam. And I don't know about the LA Times. They have some policy too. There's a lot of mainstream legacy media, that they don't want anybody to push back against the narrative. But I do think this on social media, on podcasts, et cetera, there's so much free speech going on that it makes me really happy that people are finding out more and more every day. More and more people are getting exposed to this and being exposed to climate realism. And as someone I've been on X for so many years, I'm seeing so many well-informed skeptics all the time, so many more of them. I felt sort of more alone back in 2008 or so, that I felt like there weren't a lot of other people pushing back. But now when people say crazy stuff on X, like Katie Couric just did that. She said something crazy about climate. She got almost no retweets or likes, and it might have been maybe 13 likes and about 12 replies, all of them against her, all of them pushing back against her. So again, I'm seeing a lot of signs that we are winning, and we're doing better than a lot of climate skeptics think we are even.
So, and this is why how do you say, elite or powers that be or whatever, they don't like X, for example, because you can say things there. and during COVID time you couldn't, and you cannot in Facebook, and wasn't there Zuckerberg made another X killer last year? What was the name? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Threads, maybe?
Yeah, Threads.
Might have been Threads. Yeah.
So, how is it doing, by the way? I think not so good. So
I haven't heard.
Yeah, because people like to speak freely, speak what's on their mind, of course, and this is one of the things which is still kind of. Like a Damocles sword, or what is it called? It's
sword of Damocles.
Yeah. It's when it is you're sitting under it and it might fall at any point. What I'm trying to say is that these people who are pushing this agenda are the elites or powers that be or whatever we call them. They don't like that we discuss it on X. It's what they call, UN papers. They always publish something that we need to fight misinformation, disinformation, etc., etc. So aren't you, for example, afraid that they might shut the X down, for example, or push back, so to say? Because
maybe I should be afraid, but I'm not. I'm like I said, I'm so happy that the movie is kind of out there everywhere that I think they can't put the genie back in the bottle. We're going to find a way around whatever they're doing. I think there was a Melissa Fleming from the UN who actually said, we own the science. I think that's a direct quote. Yeah. And she was shocked. If you went on Google, you could still find some stuff that was pushing back against the narrative. So in general, this whole idea that they're going to make us eat the bugs and live in 15-minute cities and not drive a real car and all that stuff, I think that's never going to happen. They're not going to succeed. There was just some Monmouth polling that came out just in the last few days in the U.S., and there 34% of people even believed that humans were the main cause of climate change. So after all this propaganda for all these decades, 66% of the people didn't even believe that basic part of the propaganda. Mm-hmm. So I think people are not, they're not stupid. And I think we're never going to accept a downgrade in our lifestyle to try to prevent bad weather. People can it might be popular to say, yeah, I believe in it, blah, blah, blah. It might be a way to virtue signal. But people are not going to stop flying or stop eating meats or any of this stuff. There's going to be a revolt if they try to force this down our throats. So I think they should just give up now, the people trying to force this on us, because it's not going to work.
Yeah. How much does the hypocrisy in this climate cult, let's call it a climate cult or climate movement, climate change movement, how much does this play a role? And I mean here that all these people who are talking about it, you mentioned celebrities, for example. Well, yes, you can say that there's a bad human-caused climate change because humans are burning fossil fuels. But if you are saying it on a boat that's on a yacht that is using a lot of fossil fuel per hour, I don't know how many liters or gallons per hour it uses, then it's just it's not the right place to say it. That's what I'm saying. So
yeah, it's not. This is a really weird cult, in that even the believers can't be bothered to behave as if they believe in the cult. That's a huge tell right there. And it's not just Leonardo DiCaprio and all these other folks. There's just everybody. We're constantly being told that we need that CO2 is going to kill our kids, blah, blah, blah. But those people, they're flying to Fiji, they're getting caught or whatever. They're living the same lifestyle basically as us. Nobody is living off grid, trying to heat their house with solar panels and line drying their clothes all the time. And like Al Gore said that in one of his books, that to prevent climate change, we should line dry our clothes. So I'm asking, when's the last time that Al Gore washed his clothes by hand and line dried them? Al Gore actually said that we should do our long haul travel via bus, long haul travel on a bus. So when's the last time Al Gore took a long, like a 6-hour bus trip to prevent bad weather? It's all about pushing this on the little people because we're too important to do this stuff ourselves. And people are smart enough, again, to see that. And that's a major factor in why even people who haven't dug into this, most of them are going, well, if you actually believe in it, why don't you live that way first? Then maybe I'll do it.
Yeah. I remember one article, it was from last year, I think. I read it in the New York Post, I guess, which was about banning those pizza ovens that are using wood. Live fire, or how do you say it?
Yeah.
So, and customers were also, there was kind of a vox pop with customers, and one customer said that couldn't just, John Kerry or Al Gore just take a few trips without the private jet, and we could still eat delicious pizza. So, yeah, people are not buying into it. I think you're absolutely correct. Why should
one more point there is that Barack Obama used to be selling this stuff back when he was president. It's going to kill us, blah, blah, blah. But then he would fly his private presidential plane to Hawaii. And I think the mileage of that plane was 0.4 miles per gallon. It just burned enormous amounts of fuel. There's no way he would stay home and not take that trip to try to prevent this bad weather in the future. They said his office was warm enough that you could grow orchids in there. That was an insider quote, that he loved to turn the heat way up. I think the UN had that too, where the UN offices were nice and warm. Because this whole idea of turning your thermostat down and shivering in winter, that's just for the little people. The elites are too important. They need to turn up the heat, and they need to fly, and they need to eat the meat and everything else.
Yeah. And the other thing is the other part of the hypocrisy is the solutions they are offering. And this is actually really bad because I think anybody who looks at how EVs are produced, or windmills or solar panels, I just, for example, sent another documentary which was about, the producer was Michael Moore. You probably have seen it.
Planet of the Humans.
Yeah, exactly. To a friend of mine who didn't know about this stuff at all. And then he looked at it and said, oh, wow. If you can show me in an hour and a half this much information about how bad actually these so-called solutions are, then what else is there? So it's really also important I think, to point out that this is a huge part of the problem as well.
There was this interesting thing that just happened in the last month or two in California, where they announced that they were going to ban internal combustion cars, so we had to have EVs. And that same week, they were telling people who did have EVs, please don't plug them in because our grid can't handle the EVs that we have. So again, there needs to be adults in the room. We can't just legislate the laws of physics and make this work because we want it to work. That's not how reality goes. And none of this stuff matches reality. That's the problem with this hoax.
But what do you think, how much does the, a wish for monetary gains or, earnings from their return on investment of those big, I don't know, who invests in those things, how much does this push this agenda?
Yeah, I think... Yeah, there's, if we're going to spend $50 trillion on this scam, of course, somebody's going to get that $50 trillion. So, yeah, that's a huge part of it. It's interesting that I think Warren Buffett, I'm kind of a fan of Berkshire Hathaway in general, but he's smart enough to realize that this wind power thing doesn't make sense. And he said that himself, that it only makes sense because of the subsidies, that we wouldn't be putting them up except for the subsidies. So this whole idea that ordinary working people through subsidies are transferring their wealth to Warren Buffett, who has got tens of billions of dollars. There is a terrible amount of wealth being transferred from working people again to people who are rich and who are scamming us. And in case, this is Warren Buffett scamming us. And I wish he would push back on it and say, we're not doing it. Doesn't make sense. We're not accepting the subsidies. But he's not willing to go that far.
Yeah. Okay, well, it has been great talking to you, but I think I have covered all my talking points here with you. And if you have something else you would like to point out, then please do, about the film or, well, okay, we talked a bit about the film as well, but please.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to climatethemovie.net, you can see the film. If you Google for Tom Nelson Substack, you can get a lot more information about the film. I am at Tom A. Nelson on X. But one piece of advice I would say is that this is so important that if this does come up in your life or online or offline, that we should all be pushing back hard against it all the time, because we need to fight for a better world for our kids. And if we let these scammers win and let the hoax continue, that it is going to cause a lot of problems for our kids, more blackouts and higher prices, inflation, more money printing. So we should all be pushing back hard all the time against this scam.
Okay, yes, I agree. So great. Thank you again, Tom, for taking the time and giving this interview. And of course, who hasn't seen Climate the Movie, like Tom just pointed out, you can go and see it. You can also come and see it on our page at freedomresearch.org. But everyone should, of course, definitely watch it. So thank you. This is it from us for today, and see you soon.